Hi everyone. Hope it went well so far. So last but not least, I'm going to give you a little talk about sub-resources. I'm sure you are looking forward to attend to the community event. I do, so I'm thirsty. But first, okay, one last conference. I will promise it will be a great one. I know it. Okay, so today we're gonna see sub-resources. We are gonna try to understand what they are not, when to use them, and when to do not use them. And plus, we're going to see how to implement the sub-resources within API Platform, and how API Platform 3 made them so easy. Right, so before getting right into it, I'm going to quickly present myself. My name is Mathias Arlot. I'm a French PHP developer, so please forgive me for that accent. I'm doing my best here, but I'm not the worst. And I work at Letiol. So I do enjoy open source. I'm making plenty of contribution to Symfony, API Platform, that kind of ecosystem. So if you want to have a look at what I do, here's my GitHub. And if you want to get in touch with me for any reason, feel free to add me on Twitter, X, or whatever you call it. Okay, so first question. Let's ask together what is actually a sub-resource. According to REST principle, it's basically nothing. It doesn't make sense to talk about sub-resources when, RESTly speaking. It doesn't make sense, and that's it. No. I won't let you go right now. We're going to have a look about sub-resources, but from another point of view that doesn't stick that much to REST. Actually, sub-resources are just resources, period. But resources that we can access from another one, okay? So that's it, exactly the definition that we must stick with. Sub-resources are resources that we can access from other resources, period. Okay, simple. So now that we have understood that, let's do a little simulation together. As you might know, right now there is the World Cup of Rugby taking place in France, okay? And let's imagine, I'm sure you will be able to imagine that we are all the very best developer in France, right? Makes sense. And that's why the French Federation of Rugby asked us to develop an API in order to manage the data of the World Cup, okay? So months ago, together, we decided to build such an API. And to do that, of course, we have used the very best tool for that, the name API Platform, of course. So we thought it was finished, but a client is a client, you know? He always has a tiny last-minute feature. So, okay, let's implement them together. Fine. So first, last-minute feature. Actually, I do not know why we didn't implement it earlier, but he wants to list team players. That makes sense. So to do that, we can reuse an endpoint that we have created earlier, the players endpoint. Okay, and we can add a filter in order to restrict the players to a given team. Here, I'm gonna get only the players that belongs to the France team. Quite simple. So just a few modifications in our code. Let's say we already had a player API resource. That's why we have an API resource PHP attribute on top of it. And we just add a new PHP attribute, the API filter. Simple. We configure the filter by saying that there is a search filter and we want to search exactly on the ID of the team property. Period. This finished. And we can deploy to production and attend to that wonderful community event. Of course, no, there is something weird here. Actually, what happens if a consumer is making a typo or is restricting with the players with a team that doesn't exist? Something logical, it will return an empty array because, of course, there is no player that are belonging to a non-existing team, of course. That makes sense. But it's kind of misleading because you get the very same result whether you are searching player associated to a team that doesn't exist and searching player associated to a team that doesn't have any player. Both results will be an empty collection. So it's kind of misleading. First issue. Second issue will be in terms of security. Let's say in the future, because we know the client, he always has a crappy idea, he wants to hide players of a given team. By using such an endpoint, it will be really, really hard, okay? So trust me, that's not the best way to do in that case. So let's take a step back. We said that we want to restrict player to a given team. In other words, we want to get the players that are belonging to the France team, for instance. And that's the belongs to part which is really important, because whenever we can say that something is belonging to something else, most of the time we can define a resource, sub-resource relationship between them. Okay. Yeah, that's it. So we can define such an URI. /teams/France, which is the resource, /players, which is the sub-resource. So that's nice because the URI itself is representing that hierarchical relationship. We can see just by looking to the URI that the players are belonging to the France team. France team here. It's really hard to say. Okay, so let's implement that sub-resource relationship with API platform. But before, I want to tell you a story, a good old love story, a good old weird love story, which is the API platform and sub-resources love story. Actually, it has been possible for a long time to leverage sub-resources within API platform. And back in the day, you have to do the following. I mean, let's say you are in the team resource, okay? And the team resource has some properties. And for instance, the players collection, right? And we had to say to API platform that players are actually another resource, a nested resource, a sub-resource actually. And to say, to tell it to API platform, you'll just have to, back in the day, to add the PHP attribute API sub-resource on top of the collection player. Actually, that makes sense. Huh? We are in a resource, and we want to point the nested resources. And this design, quite simple, apparently good, appeared to be really, really bad. So bad. Because it involved a lot of specific code, which was hard to maintain, hard to enhance, was full of edge cases, and plus it was lacking some basic feature. The API resource system, earlier than 3.0, was read-only. Okay, you cannot delete, post, patch, or put. And here you can only get the collections, and that's it. So that's not convenient. And for the record, and for the little stories, the revamp of the sub-resources was one of the major reasons of the whole API Platform 3 redesign. Okay? Nice. So now, there is the brand new way to conceptualize resources, and for the best. As you can see, there is no more sub-resources. So no more sub-resources problem because it doesn't exist at all. So now, instead, we're going to define new operations, but scoped operation, I mean. So let's have a look at the get collection operation, right? We have an URI template, and that URI template is having a variable part, the team ID here. And the team ID, as you can see within the URI variable, is pointing to another stuff. For instance, the team. Okay? So basically, it's a resource, an operation, that is related to another relation. Sorry. And so, for example, the get item operation is doing the very same way. We are defining the URI template, scoping the URI to the team. And so we get the following stuff. So yeah, so we have plenty of way to access to the player resources. We have inverted the relation. Remember in the slide before? Yeah, we were in the team, and the team said the player is my sub-resource. Right now, only the player is required. It just said, I'm the player resource, and you can access me like the following. The traditional way, using the API resources, or with some fancy operation like the get collection and the get item operation. So let's focus just a little on that part, which is quite new. Okay, so we have an URI template, which has variable parts, and in order to configure that variable part, you have to specify it in the URI variable PHP array. And we associate a link stuff. The link is basically a value object which is representing a relationship between two stuff. Basically, here we are saying that if you want to go to player, you have to come from the team. That's why we have from class team. And then the property that is representing the actual link is in the player. That's why there is two property. And the property is named team. Okay, so quite simple. Providers and processor will read that link in order to understand which kind of relation it has to deal with and to proceed stuff accordingly. So nice. By doing that, we're going to get the following response, which is what we expect, actually. But almost. Because if you have a look at the @id arrays, you will see that it is not scoped within the teams. I want to have /team/France/player/Dupont, so that if I follow the link, I won't lose the team context, you know? And so that. So, qu'est-ce que je veux dire? Yeah, this stuff, okay. Why it's /player/Dupont? Yeah, I don't know. It's because of an internal API platform behavior. Okay, so whenever API platform has to find an item URI template, it will look in the resource and scan each operation one by one until it finds one which is a get item operation. Okay, and the API resource, the first PHP attribute, okay, is the same as writing that. Of course, is the basic CRUD operation. So whenever API platform tries to read the operations, it's going to find directly the first operation, the get item operation, which is /player/player_id. But if I have had inverted the first get and the last get, I will have instead the /team/France/player/Dupont. So it's not reliable at all. It's depending on order. It's not explicit. I don't like that. And moreover, let's say an unexperimented developer add a new get operation on the very top, and it's a get admin operation. It can, cause some troubles here. So to do that, to fix that issue, we can add and specify a new property within the get collection operation, which is the item URI template, right? And by doing that, we are explicitly saying to API platform that the item URI, the item operation, is the one which is matching the following URI template. So this is the last one. Okay. And problem solved. If the slide want to update, problem solved. We now are /team/France/player/Dupont. That's perfect. Congrats. Problem solved. We can grab a drink together. Now, in the meantime, just for you to know, for the ones who are defining resources using YAML and XML, I just wanted to say to you that it is still possible, even if you have plenty of new fancy stuff like new link, underlink with closures and so on. It is still possible to do it in YAML, but you will have to adapt a little bit. Okay. So, of course, in the meantime, our client found another urging feature. And this time, he wants to get players' sprints. Okay? So, we are not now used to what? Okay. Okay, so we imagined together the following endpoints, right? /player/player_id/prints and /player/player_id/prints/id. We choose to use sub-resources because there is an existential dependency between the sprint and the player. There is no sprint without any player. So it's kind of a belong-to relationship, but stronger, but still. Okay, so we want these two endpoints, but actually we want just one. We just want the collection one. The item one, we do not care because it doesn't make sense to retrieve only one sprint, you know. We just want the sprint made by the player right now. This is the feature. So to implement that, you are getting used to it. We're going to define a get collection operation with an URI template /player/player ID /sprint with the proper URI variable, and that's it. And the REST specification forces us to specify an IRI for each resource, okay? So we want that IRI to be scoped by player. That's why we are writing item URI template, player ID, sprint ID, right? But we do not have any operation under that one, right? So we have to write it. We add a new operation, a get item operation with the proper URI template. So that's great, but by doing that, we have broken our requirements. I mean, we didn't want the sprint to be accessible one by one, but by doing that, they are now accessible one by one. So to solve that, we can do this simple stuff. We are saying in the item operation that the status will be a 404. Okay? So the provider won't be called, so we can throw the URI variable, and that's it. So quite simple. Is it good? But it is not perfect because that operation will still be within the documentation. So let's imagine you are a consumer that is reading the documentation. You'll see an operation /player/player ID /sprint/sprint ID, which is returning a 404. Doesn't make sense at all. So to cover that issue, Antoine talked about that. You can specify OpenAPI false to say that I don't want it in the documentation. It's for internal purposes. By the way, because it's occurring quite often, API platform provides an alias for that, which is the not exposed operation. And the not exposed operation is exactly what we've seen earlier. It's an internal operation that is required to REST and API platform in order to work, but it isn't intended to be called at all. Okay, good job. We can deploy now. No, we cannot. Another very important feature, and this does make sense. Yeah, the clients want to be how many seats were sold for a given match. So before that feature, we decided together to develop and to implement such an entity relationship. Voila. I don't know why, but this is like that. So we have stadiums, and for each stadium we have plenty matches, and for each match we have a collection of orders, which has some order lines, and for each order line it can have one or several seats. Easy. So actually it could make sense in some cases, right? But in my opinion, and I think in our opinion, it's way too nested, of course. And the nestedness of that stuff can cause a lot of troubles. First, the more you nest, the longer your URI will be. And this is already quite long. And at some point, even the HTTP server will reject the request, saying 414, the URI is too long, I can't handle it. So that's an issue. And moreover, whenever you want to retrieve seats, it will involve a lot of table, and depending on the database and the data storage you have chosen, it could cause some troubles, of course. But even worse, now, okay, let's say it does work. But what happens when a client wants to retrieve the sold seat? It will first have to do an HTTP call in order to retrieve all the orders of a given match, one HTTP call. Then, for each order, it will have to call the order lines endpoint. So 1 plus n HTTP call, n representing the amount of orders. And then, for each other line, it had to call another endpoint, the seat endpoint, in order to retrieve the seats. So m call per line per order. Ooh la la. That we can see that there will be a lot of HTTP call. Let's take an example. Let's say we have one match with something like 30K orders, and each order will have like 2 order lines, so 60K, so it's almost 90K HTTP call. It's just not acceptable at all. So this is a problem, and this is a common problem, well known in the API community, and it is named the N+1 problem. You might have read something like that elsewhere. So to solve that issue, quite simple. A new endpoint /seat and the proper filters. So here's the stadium, the match, and the status, the source status. And by doing like that, the client will be able to retrieve the wanted seat, but just with one HTTP call. And I do love this example because it shows that sub-resources aren't always the best design, okay? You must guess the usages of your API by the consumer and to design your API accordingly. So yeah, sub-resources aren't the truth. By the way, nesting too much is not always a good stuff. And my rule of thumb is like, you must nest at most 2 levels. After, I think it's too much, but it can happen. Okay, hold on, the last feature, and we are done. So now, and the last, the clients want to be able to report team injuries. And when do you see rugbymen and their collisions? Yeah, it do make sense. This endpoint will have a lot of traffic, of course. So to do that, quite simple, new endpoint /post/team /team ID /injuries. And just a reminder, before API Platform 3, this just wasn't possible at all, right? You'll have to implement it on your own, and it was way too complicated and even sometimes impossible. With API Platform 3, that's it, easy. Just a new post operation with the proper URI template, with the proper URI variable, and done. So that's great. Congrats to the developers and the community. That's way better. Okay, so here is what the clients will have to send to us. Okay, to send an injury, it will have to send a link to the player, the type of the injury, the duration of the injury, and the team, the related team, to the endpoint that we have defined together before. But there is something annoying here. Some of you might have noticed, but we are repeating ourselves, /team/Italy, in the body and in the URI. And this is because of REST specification that force us for operation like post or put to send the whole resource, links included, right? But we already know the link in the URI. So we are repeating ourselves, and yeah, there is nothing preventing the consumer to set in the body /team/France and in the endpoint /team/Italy. It is possible. So in this case, which team to take? So it's misleading, and it can involve a lot of mistakes. But this is a specification. C'est ça. But API Platform 3 got you back with a new experimental feature, which is the create provider. So it's an internal and experimental data provider that is for you reading, you will see the URI, and set for you in the body, in the actually deserialized body, the team. So the clients won't have to specify it in the body on its own. But if he's sure that he is not doing a mistake, he can still override it and still write it in the body. And the body always wins. Allez, mon petit. Okay, so yeah, basically that create provider will read in the URI template and try to find the the parent relation, okay? And then in the URI variable, he is able to guess that there is a team. So he go in the team and try to find the very first get item operation. And when he found it, it will use the provider, the associated provider, call it, and to retrieve the actual team instance and to set the property in the body. So yeah, quite complicated, but it's okay. As I said, API platform still, once again, is iterating over each get item operation in order to find the first one. Okay. So once again, we do not have the control on the get item operation, and we want the control. So that's why you can specify within the extra property the parent URI template, key value, to explicitly say, in order to find the parent team, I want you to use the operation related to /team ID. So it is within the extra properties because this feature is still experimental. But once it won't be experimental anymore, I'm sure that there will be a parent URI template property in the involved operations such as post or put or whatever. Voila. Want a drink? No, you can't. A very last feature for you. This time, he wants to get match details. Once again, it makes sense. I don't know what we have done earlier together, but that was, we was in a hurry. So what actually are match details? Match details are plenty of stuff. I mean, the to involve team, the date when it took place, the referee, the score, and the list of events, for example. So here I written, a subset of that. Okay, so we have the score and the list of events. And this gives us the following response for a get item. Okay, so that's great, but there's an issue here. And the issue is related to the events. I mean, first, what if I just want to retrieve the score? I will still fetch all of the events. This is the overfetching problem. This is an issue. Then, what happens if we have a lot of events? The list of events isn't paginated at all. So we're gonna do a huge query to the database, and the response body which will be really, really huge. Plus, we cannot filter events and so on. And the /event/ blah blah, it's not scoped by match. Well, it's like a get collection operation, but way worse. We cannot afford that stuff. Okay, so to tackle that issue, we can use the API property PHP attribute and set the readable link to false. By doing that, we are saying to API platform, hey, I do not care about the event content, right? I just want the array. So we get the following response. So first, that's great. Our response is a bit smaller. Still, we are doing overfetching, because if I just want the score, I still get all of the events. It's not paginated. I cannot filter. It's not scoped by matches. And we even introduced the n+1 problem right here. So it's worse. Sorry, it's not the good solution right now. Instead, we're going to leverage another experimental feature. Thank you, Grégoire. Which is the URI template of the API property. This feature allows us to say to an API platform, hey, the events content, I do not care, but if the client wants to get the events, you will just have to follow that link, okay? So that's really, really fortunate, and it will help us a lot. Because during serialization, of course, API platform and the serializer component will just forget the events and instead replace with a simple string. And this gives us the following. On the left, you see, we just now have for the event a string. So by doing that, no more overfetching, right? That's good. If I want the score, I only, I do not fetch the whole big list of the events. But still, if I want to get the event, I can follow the links and get the collection. And this collection will be paginated, I can filter, I can scope the ID, and so on, so it's perfect. And plus, I have split my resource better, which will improve a lot the cacheability of my API, of course. Still, we have the N+1 problem, but I think it's acceptable, and we can even, using something like Vulkan and FrankenPHP, use the preload in order to send directly from the server the matches, the events. So we can mitigate the N+1 problem if we want to. Yeah, one last time. Yeah, the very, very last, it's a pinky promise right now. So we can trust him. He wants to get a team sponsor, okay? Allez, hold on. Okay, so to get a sponsor, I can, let's say we're gonna design that kind of endpoint. /team /France /sponsor /Lecoq Sportif. Fair enough. But earlier in our application, we have designed another endpoint, /sponsor /Lecoq Sportif. And these two endpoints are pointing to the very same resource, okay? One, which is the canonical one, which is the /sponsor /Lecoq Sportif, and an alternate one, the /team /France /sponsor /Lecoq Sportif. So to implement that, we first write an API resource, the sponsor class, and define the canonical operation with the empty get operation. And then we're going to define another get operation, which is a server source-like get item operation. So yeah, you know it right now. So that's great. But right now, we have two endpoints to the very same thing. And that's an issue. Because first, we're going to have a bigger documentation. We're going to have more stuff to maintain, more stuff to test. We have increased our API surface. C'est ça. And yeah. And plus, the client will cache twice the very same Lecoq Sportif, because for the client and the browser, it will be two different resources. And anyway, it goes against the REST principles, which saying that one resource has only one endpoint. So we cannot let it like that. We have to find a way to fix that. And to do that, we're going to leverage another feature of API Platform, which is the, let's say, doesn't have a name, but we come up with a name right now, the alternate resource redirection. Yeah. So it's kind of easy. You'll just have to specify a 3xx status, and API Platform will see that it's an alternate representation of the get item operation. So it will redirect with the status code that you have specified the client to the canonical representation. Exactly. So by doing that, we have virtually reduced the two endpoints into one. I mean, we now have two entry points to one endpoint. And so it solves a lot of stuff, such as caching, and we are compatible with REST, and so on and so on. But still, how API Platform does find the get item operation? It will do the very same stuff, iterating over all of get item operation and finding the very first one. So, as you now know, we don't want that. And by preparing that talk 2 days ago, I noticed that this was missing. So I created a PR for that, just to add a canonical URI template. And that's what I love in open source. I mean, missing issue, okay, PR, merge, everyone can leverage it. And moreover, a talk and a conference, and plenty of speakers can confirm that, often leads to a bunch of fixes and features, and yeah, it's a sparkling, time for open source. So yeah, that's great. So now you can, because it's experimental, of course, specify in the extra properties the canonical URI template to use. I mean, to very point the get item operation to use. This time it's okay. This time it's okay. So good job. We can now deploy to production. We can now to grab a drink and so on. I hope you learned some stuff about sub-resources and actually that sub-resources doesn't exist anymore. And yeah, I just wanted to say that I showed a lot of experimental feature because we were living on the edge right now and because API platform is evolving quite fast, in my opinion. So please, if you want to help us, go to try this experimental feature, try to break them, try to improve them, try to fix bugs and so on, and to report so that it won't be experimental anymore. Anyway, thank you for your attention.